This is indeed a joint work with my colleague from the Vienna Institute of Demography, Kryštof Zeman. And what we will try to show you in the next 12 minutes is some new perspective on cohort outmigration from Central and Eastern Europe. I see I'm not able to move through no, okay. So most of you know for sure that the population in the region has been emerging and then accelerating after 1990, after the breakdown of the state socialist political system. Before that, there were already a few countries experiencing population declines, such as Hungary, for instance, but the trend has become really region-wide after 1990. And the reasons are a combination of comparatively high and at some point of time in the 90s, even rising mortality rates, falling fertility rates, especially during the 1990s, and obviously outmigration. If you plot countries globally and you rank them by the pace of depopulation in the last 3 decades, with one exception of Puerto Rico, this list of most rapidly depopulating countries is including solidly just the countries from Central and Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. The red countries are the former countries of the former Soviet Union. The green countries are countries of Central, Eastern, Southeastern Europe outside of the ex-USSR, and you see only Puerto Rico is in between. So the depopulation is really very strongly concentrated in the region of Central and Eastern Europe. The outmigration from the region has been driven by both pull and push factors, and the push factors obviously include economic shocks, in some countries conflicts and lack of opportunities for young adults, as well as very low income in some countries in the region. Pull factors, I should mention especially the increased opportunities to study and work in other countries, and for countries which enter the European Union, obviously, the EU has become a space where many people move very easily, but also for many countries outside of the EU, people now have much easier options to travel to the EU to get employed in the EU than in the past. So as a result of this, East-West migration within Europe has become the key migration stream within Europe, which at the end of the day hugely differentiates population trends across the continent, because fertility rates don't differ much between the East and the West, not so much between the South and the North, although there are differences, but the huge differences in population trends and prospects within Europe and between European regions are by and large caused by migration, outmigration from the East and immigration to the West. However, outmigration from Central Eastern Europe has been often and consistently underreported. First of all, because most countries in the region lack a proper registration system that would allow us to properly track outmigration and to know how many people are leaving Czechia, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, and other countries in the region, not speaking of countries with even poorer registration system. Population census data are only partially correcting for this underreported outmigration, in part because the questions in the census are sometimes ambiguous, and many people who are partly or fully living abroad are still reported in the national censuses. As a result of this, population estimates for many countries in the region are often too high, and this affects also other demographic indicators we are working with. So the scale of depopulation in the region is often being underestimated. And this is one illustration of that by Irén Gyödry, showing for Hungary year after year after year, the officially reported number of people, of Hungarian citizens leaving Hungary based on Hungarian statistics. And these are the dark orange or red bars. And then you can compare them with the light orange bars, which is the number which you get when you count all the Hungarian nationals which are registered in different countries of the European Union. And you see the big gap between them, which is by and large due to underreported outmigration from Hungary. But Hungary is not just one case. It's a more kind of a typical illustration of what's happening in the region. So what we try to do in the next 7 minutes or so is to try to analyze cumulative long-term outmigration from a region, from a cohort perspective, making use of the data which are somewhat more reliable, not perfect, but more reliable than the local data on outmigration. And this is counting immigrants from all the receiving countries, especially in Europe. So our main question is how many women and men born in selected countries have stayed in these countries, died in these countries, or have moved to another country by 2020. We work with 5-year cohorts from 1950 to 2009, and we look at both absolute numbers and relative shares, which are relative to each 5-year cohort at the start of its existence. So we relate these numbers to the number of women and men born in each given country by 5-year periods. Here you can see the list of countries analyzed, grouped in 3 regions: Central Europe, Baltic countries, and Ukraine, and lastly, Southeastern Europe. Here you get a little bit of more glimpse about the data we are using. In a nutshell, we combine data on the number of births. These are most accurate and least controversial. Estimates of cohort survivorship mostly based on human mortality database data, but sometimes we need to replace this or estimate this for countries where we don't have these data, and data for cumulative outmigration, which by and large are based on Eurostat statistics on population by country of birth, sex, and age group in 2020. When we don't have those, we look at least at the totals by country of origin, including UN estimates of the totals. And as a residual, we get also an estimate of the population who are born in the country and still living in the country in 2020. So 2020 is our main point. We have some expectations, but for the sake of having some time to show you results, I drop those. To show you what we get for individual countries, consider one country like Bulgaria. We can reconstruct population pyramids for our cohort. So it's not entire population, it's population age 10 to 69, which we are looking at. You can look at the number of people born in the country and still living in the country, that's the green. Number of people born in the country, living elsewhere, that's the orange part. A number of people born in the country who died, that's the black part of the pyramid. And based on these data, we can also estimate how many people who were born in a given period in Bulgaria and who are still alive, what share of them are living in another country. And in the case of Bulgaria, you can see a really very strong cohort profile of the cohorts 1975 to 2000 actually having very, very high proportion of originally Bulgarian-born people living abroad, between 25 and 30%, which is really a high number. Now, I cannot move my presentation again, so I can see if this, now, okay. So let me show you, in a few minutes, I have some of the results. First of all, big differences between countries. Look at migration profile for Czechia. People born in Czechia on the left side, people born in Lithuania on the right side. In Czechia, we don't have any very clear cohort which would be standing out for high outmigration. It's low outmigration rate for all cohorts for both sexes. In Lithuania, we have really huge outmigration among relatively young women and men born around 1980, 1994, and even much more so for women. So women are leaving Lithuania more than men are. The proportion up to almost 40% among the cohorts born in the late 1980s. If we summarize for all countries in the region, you get the profile you see here on the left. Relatively few of the cohorts born until 1970 outmigrated. The biggest outmigration intensity for the women and men born between 1980 and 1995. About 17% of people born in the region overall outmigrated. But as I mentioned, huge differences between countries. Looking, for instance, at the high intensity outmigration cohorts born 75 to 1994, we have extreme level in Albania. 41% of people born in Albania are living abroad who survive until now. And we have comparatively much lower outmigration from Central Europe, but also differences between countries there, with Croatia having higher outmigration, Poland and Hungary as well. But then look at the Baltic countries, look at Southeastern Europe, between 15% of population outmigrating in Ukraine, up to, as I mentioned, 41% in Albania, 32% in Lithuania. There are differences between younger and older cohorts. What I want to mention, when we look just at women and men aged 20 to 24, these numbers are still very, very high in many countries in the Baltic region, in Ukraine, and in Southeastern Europe, up to 1/3. Just at this young age, already 1/3 of people have left in these countries who were born in these countries. We can also try to visualize it in colors. When you see the red color for a specific country there, this is really high concentration of outmigration in these cohorts. You see that in some cohorts, really a lot of outmigration, in some countries, a lot of outmigration concentrated around those born in 1980 to 89. You see the squares there, these numbers. These are the highest intensity outmigration cohorts. And in most countries, these are cohorts born from 1980 to 1989, who really took the opportunity and left.
Tomáš, you have half a minute to finish.
Perfect. So I skipped gender differences, which are not that big at the end of the day. And let me use this half a minute to show some discussion. So I hope that we have convinced you that outmigration really has a huge impact. And skipping most of the points in this discussion, one point to be made is that when you listen to the discussions in individual countries, the governments are often completely fixed on the idea that women need to have 2.1 kids for the country to kind of have a stable population and to reproduce themselves. This is completely wrong from the perspective of what we have been showing you is this picture, because all these assumptions, besides being really simplistic, completely ignore the impact of huge outmigration from the region. When you really build into the argument that native-born women need to reproduce themselves, look at the dark red or brownish bars here. This would need to be the level of fertility for the women born in 1985 to 89 to reproduce those who are staying in a country and make sure that they have the same size in terms of the next generation's cohort. And these reach up to 3.6 kids per woman in Albania and 3.4 in Lithuania. Thank you very much.